So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Kelly Romano, the Director of Infection Control and Patient Safety. And you're probably thinking, what does the infection lady have anything to do with this? But it's the role of patient safety where we want to roll in just culture. So what I'll say is that this is really a way for us to increase transparency within our organization and encourage those safety reports that we keep talking to you about, so that we can learn from and redesign our systems that may not be working for us, because that can happen. So this works in conjunction with our standards of behavior, our accountability policies, and once we have this in place, we've then created a fair and just and consistent method of accountability for the entire hospital. It looks like some of you look confused, but you won't be by the end, hopefully. So what happens when a physician doesn't detect a life-threatening disease, or if there's an order that's misread, if the pharmacist pulls the wrong drugs, if the CFO, the Chief Financial Officer, underestimates the cost of something, if the designer of an IV pump doesn't recognize how that design could be misused or create a workaround, if the unit manager can't find enough staff to fill the day, or if a nurse delivers the correct medication but to the wrong patient. So all of these things could be just a simple human error. That could happen because people make mistakes. That's what humans do. We make mistakes. That's a known fact. So think of healthcare as being a complex system, right, where we as humans are in that system. That makes everything more complicated, and humans can err. We know that. But they can't be removed from healthcare. So we can't take people out of the equation. And we have to change our healthcare culture by designing those better systems and being more critical of our everyday choices within those systems that we've created. That culture can ultimately influence our fulfillment of our patients' trust, right? So if we're working in a transparent agency where we're open and free to talk about our errors and what happened to us during the course of the day, that's going to reflect to our patients that we really do care and we want to talk about the errors because they happened. There's no way to avoid that. But why did it happen? So we have these 5 skills, right? These are essential to producing better outcomes. So these are the first 3 in the set of 5. It's values and expectations, system design, and behavioral choices. So what we can say about this is that we can't expect people to be perfect. We just can't. We can't expect the system to be perfect. We live in an imperfect system and fallible humans. That's where we are, because that's how we design things. And when we can finally sit back and recognize that that can happen, we can create real expectations and be successful as an organization. So our system design then is changing the systems to anticipate a human error. So we have to design things around people. And how do we make that happen to help people make good choices and it supports you in getting your job done safely? It also has to fit your work environment. Does your role mean that you're running around the hospital all day long? It has to be flexible and adapt to your certain needs. And then behavioral choices. So what kind of choices are you making during the course of the day to make that system work for you? Or are you creating a workaround that could potentially cause an error? So if you think about the behavioral choice, how many of you are familiar with the standards of behavior? Have you heard it? Have you heard standards of behavior? Mm-hmm. Put your hands up. Yes? Okay. So think about the behavioral choice in relation to the standards of behavior, where standards say patient needs to know where they're going. I'm not supposed to point in that direction or verbally tell them how to get there. The standards say I need to physically take that patient to where they need to go. Suppose that I have to go to a board meeting in the morning, and there's a patient in front of me who needs to know where they have to go. I have a choice to make, right? And it's set on our value that our organization values we take the patient to where they need to go. But my expectation is I have to get to that meeting on time. So what do? Do I make myself late to the meeting by taking the patient where they need to go? The answer to that is yes. Because our value is patient satisfaction, patient safety, making sure that they get to where they need to go. I can explain to the board why I was late, right? So the last two skills really are the core of Just Culture. This is learning systems, accountability, and justice. This is really where the core of Just Culture begins, and this will make the most change in our organization. So your learning system is essentially, we have evaluated what happened. We realized that the system failed us. We can't do anything with that unless we learn from it and talk about it. We have to be able to do that and then learn from our mistakes and then share that learning with the rest of the organization. And accountability and justice, this is really where Just Culture comes in, right? Just Culture leads to better management of better outcomes and designing safe systems and safe behavioral choices. Because if the system's safe, you're not going to make a behavioral choice that works around that safe system. Without all of these, we can't actually make the changes to help prevent errors from happening. In the Just Culture, there's 3 types of manageable behavior. Human error, at-risk behavior, and reckless behavior. So in trying to come up with a scenario that everyone will understand, because when we tend to talk, a lot of our focus seems to be clinical. So I'm going to relate this to driving. How many of you come to work on autopilot? Right? You get to work and you have no idea how you got there this morning. Because you know the route, you just get in your car and you drive, right? Something could happen on your way to work. That's kind of like a human error. It's like, ooh, you know what, I wasn't thinking I had to go to the bank on my way to work. You just showed up at work, right? So that really is a type of human error. At-risk behavior. You don't have to raise your hand for this one, but how many of you drive over the speed limit?
Really?
I know a lot of people in here who have a left foot. But at-risk behavior is driving over the speed limit. This is something you do because really the consequence isn't there for you, right? The likelihood of you driving 5 miles over the speed limit and having an accident or someone getting hurt is low to you, right? That risk isn't there. You're not thinking about it. But in all actuality, there is a risk there. So you're taking a risk driving over the speed limit because that's posted and that's the law. But that risk is still there. Reckless behavior is comparable to driving under the influence. So when you drive under the influence, you're being reckless. You're not thinking about anybody else that's on the road, but the likelihood of something happening is very high. You have literally got in the car when you know that that is absolutely wrong. So these are the 3 types of behavior that we look at. So when we attempt to transition to this Just Culture, we have set expectations for our management team. And you have to know that because they're going to be held accountable for things as well. What we're trying to do here as managers is create an open learning environment. So we have to learn from our mistakes and be willing to talk about it. So you all have to be willing to put that forward to us. And then they are supposed to have learned, and this is really difficult to do, this is a big skill, how to counsel staff. So you got in the car, you went 5 miles over the speed limit. Well, what's going to happen there? Maybe nothing. But the coaching aspect is, you know what, you really shouldn't go over the speed limit because you know that you could probably hurt somebody or, you know, something could happen. Coaching employees is really hard. Consoling employees is like, Today, you gave the correct medication, but it was to the wrong patient. Why did that happen? If it was just something that just snapped in the morning, like you weren't even thinking about it and you just quick zoomed, you're consoling people. I'm really sorry that that happened to you. For instance, and I'll use my own example because I made the error. Isolation patients, everybody freaks out about it, right? I personally didn't put in an order for isolation on a patient. Why? Because it was a new process. And I really wasn't even thinking about it. I put the patient in isolation and the order didn't go in. I didn't do it. So the consolation is, you know what? I'm really sorry that that happened. Nobody was hurt. It was just really a human error. It was just slipped my mind and that's it. That's consoling people. I'm really sorry that that happened to you. I'm hoping that it doesn't happen again. This can happen. So we're limiting the use of warnings and punitive actions. Why? Because we're realizing that there's human errors and there's at-risk behavior. So rather than getting to a process where we're going to hire every single person, that's not what we want to see. You have to look at the entire system. If you scan medications and your barcode scanner doesn't always work, what are you going to do? You're probably going to get that patient their meds because you know that they need it at a certain time, but why didn't you scan? People are going to come down on you didn't scan that med, you didn't scan that med. Why? Connectivity issues. Oh, it wasn't charged. So there are ways that people make that risk happen that you're not even thinking about it because you got to get the patient their meds. And that's not the problem. You got to get the patient the meds. But the reason we scan is to prevent an error from happening. And the scanning doesn't happen. So we have to understand why these things happen. And until we understand it, we can't make changes. The barcode scanning issue was an issue here. And what did we do? We changed that system so that now it's tethered to the computer and it's a little bit easier to scan meds. We have to look for common threads. Is there a link? We can't know if there's common threads if it's not reported. If it's not reported, we can't work on it. We can't see what's going on. We also have expectations for staff, right? Look for risks in the system that you work in. I don't work in your system. I'm not a daily flow, process flow person. I'm not at the bedside. I'm not registering patients. I'm not doing studies on folks. So I can't know that a system is broken unless we talk about it. So do you work in a place where you know that there's a system design failure? You have to look for that. And risks in your own behavioral choices. So what kind of choices are you making during the course of the day that could potentially put folks at risk? Are you looking at the risk versus the benefit? Did you go 5 miles over the speed limit? We also look at being late to work, right? Were you late to work because the line at Starbucks was really long and you wanted to bring Kelly Romano a coffee? Or were you late to work because there was an accident in front of you and you stopped in a good faith effort to help that person? So you have to look at all of those things, the risk versus the benefit, and reporting the adverse events. So we do tie into the standards of behavior, right? I talked earlier about getting the patient to where they need to go. And it's really just culture, a way of holding everyone accountable for upholding the standards of behavior. Because we have those standards in place as an expectation of things that we should be doing to make our culture better. And we talk about respect and empathy, responsibility, affinity, integrity, and they're all part of just culture and what it really means. And we have to address every event in the exact same manner. So anything that happens is going to be addressed in the exact same way. So there is no difference, there should be no difference in the way that events are addressed. We should have an investigation, we should talk about the process, see if there's a system design problem. So we work in imperfect systems and we have imperfect choices, right? So no human endeavor can be risk-free. And healthcare is no exception to that, because healthcare, there's tons of risks all the time, right? We all want to take care of patients, and we all want to do it well. That's not what, the reason we get into healthcare is to help people. Until we can talk freely about errors that may be happening, we're not going to get there. We're not going to have the safest patient population, and that's what we're aiming to do. We're designing these systems around our providers so that you guys can take that back to the bedside and do what you need to do. You can't will yourself to be perfect, right? Does anybody in here think that they're perfect? Right? We all do. But we know that that's not possible, and we can't guarantee a perfect outcome for our patient. We can't guarantee that until we talk about all these things. So, with that, I thank you, and what questions do you have for me? I'm glad you all stayed awake and listened. This is a big group. Questions? No questions, really? What do you think about Just Culture? Do you think it could work? It's okay if you say no. It's okay. Does anyone think that it won't work? Now you're falling asleep on me.
Yeah. I think it depends on the individual. There's a lot of people with strong personalities that are not gonna give into this.
Yeah. And so I can tell you that we've talked to other hospitals who've implemented this, and it's taken some of them 7-9 years to implement. So this isn't going to happen overnight. And like you said, it depends on who the person is and how willing. How can I say this? How the trends have been in the past in your ability to be transparent. So are you now able to talk freely to managers, directors, etc., or are you not? And how long will it take you to become comfortable to do that? I think that's where people get hung up. Just know you can always be transparent with me. As the patient safety officer, I'm always willing to hear what it is that you have to say, because it's really important to me. And it's important to you guys, right? You're here because you want to help people, not because you want to harm them. We're all here for that same reason, and that's the whole point of this, is to finally get to a place where we can all be comfortable coming forward. And I know sometimes that's difficult. I know it's difficult because I've had people come and talk about things that it's very upsetting, and they don't want to bring it forward or talk about who made the error or what happened. Well, we have to. We have to talk about it, or it's never going to change. We won't ever get to where we want to be. It's a good point, though. And it's okay for you to think that it won't work. I can tell you within our own core team, which involves Beth and Anne-Marie, Pat Modafferi, Angie Nicholas, myself, Robin Ryan, Karen Baytot, Victoria from HR, Peggy from Offsite. We all doubt a lot of things through the entire training that we went to. We took a 4-day course, 8 full hours, and you can imagine how difficult it is to get all these people in a room for 8 hours for 4 days. And by the end of it, we were very excited to roll this out, and we do really want to hear what you have to say. So I'm hoping that this will be the start of becoming a more transparent and more flowing organization, because it's going to make it better for our patients. It's going to reflect in you, and that then reflects back to the patients, which again will bring HCAP scores up, because you're all hear all about that, our satisfaction of the patients. It all rolls into one. It all rolls into one. Any other? Yes.
Does it change the step process from HR?
The accountability? It does not. It actually supports that process. So it's something we're not presenting here today because it's not something that we feel like needs a lot of detail, but that the managers have been trained on is there is an algorithm for every event. And you literally take that algorithm and you talk about, was the intent to harm someone? Was there a mistaken belief that that risk outweighed the benefit? Like, there's a whole process. And then at the end of that, you come to 3 conclusions. Do you console the employee and say, hey, I'm really sorry that that happened. Like, I can relate to you. This happened to me. Do you coach them? Hey, you know, this is why we have that barcode scanning in place, so it prevents errors. Maybe we redesign this system and then you choose to use the scanner. Or are you at that reckless behavior where you got in the car drunk and you were reckless? That's the point where you're in the accountability process to say, you know, do you take the next step? So that, and what happens is, if there's a repeat event with the same person and they haven't changed after coaching, you follow the accountability process. But it doesn't change that at all. It reinforces it. And it reinforces the way that we look at that process. So rather than, in an event that might have happened where you could have looked at an employee and said, that was ridiculous. Like, that was blatantly obvious. You made an error and bye. And we're getting to a point where we're writing people up and we're firing. Rather than that, we're going to look at the system as a whole and say, oh my gosh, like, no wonder why that error happened. Like, look at all these things that lined up to make it perfect for that to happen. So it changes that perspective. Like, so it's really interesting. Sometimes when you look at it and you look at blatant errors and you go, off with their heads. It's now changing that to say, maybe our system doesn't work for us. Maybe there's a reason that that happens. Because it's true sometimes. And believe me, we go over scenarios every month and we still come up with different answers. So it's going to take a while. Yes.
So this just stems off of the standards of behavior. It's pretty much the same thing. It's just being reiterated in a different way.
It's being reiterated, but it lends us a different perspective to look at why the error happened. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So we're holding people accountable to what we see as an organization to be the standard, but there could be an error that occurs that is not necessarily the fault of employee or staff. I mean, let's see. There was a heparin misdose in a NICU. I want to say Oklahoma. 6 babies received the wrong dose of heparin. It was an adult dose. And how did that happen? You know, you're going to say to that nurse, bye, because you administered the wrong dose to all these babies. Wasn't just one nurse, there were several on different shifts. And what happened was, from start to finish, the entire thing was a mistake. Pharmacy pulls the wrong dose, puts it in the MedRx. Nurse goes in there, looks at the label, but the label's a similar color and the name looks similar, pulls it out anyway. Nobody actually scanned, but they're in a process where that right drawer opened up, I'm pulling that out, I'm going to give it to the baby. But from start to finish, should that nurse have seen that the label was different? Sure. Should the pharmacy tech have known bringing that up that was an adult dose? Yeah. But you know what happened as a result of that? They ended up changing the packaging for that particular heparin so it would never happen again. So it's easy for us to look at that and go, oh my God, you killed 3 babies. Bye. Now we're looking at the process from start to finish to say, where did all those holes line up? And oh my God, no wonder why you made that error. So yes, standards of behavior, but it gives us a different perspective on how to evaluate it. Anything else? Awesome.